Good morning. On behalf of the San Diego North Economic Development Council, I want to welcome you to our 8th annual North County Economic Summit, presented by our title sponsor, Wells Fargo. As those that have attended in the past years know, normally at the Economic Summit, by this time we would be finishing up our second cup of coffee at the Cal State San Marcos Student Union Ballroom. But I don't need to tell anyone that these are not normal times. It's been an extremely difficult 14 months. But there's hope on the horizon. Restaurants throughout North County are once again open for in-person dining. Vaccine rollout is accelerating. Legoland reopened earlier this month. And North County hillsides are alive with new growth and rebirth. Today, we're joining you from the studios of KOCT, the voice of North County, and a fantastic partner of SDNEDC. Thank you, KOCT, for all the work you've done to make this summit a success. I want to thank all our North County healthcare workers, and especially SDNEDC investors Tri-City Medical, Palomar Health, Scripps Health, and Kaiser Permanente. What the healthcare heroes at these networks and hospitals did in the face of the pandemic is awe-inspiring. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Wells Fargo. For 8 years, they've been key to putting on this event and were instrumental in helping hundreds of small businesses in North County navigate through the early days of the pandemic. Next, I want to thank our other sponsors for this event. Harrah's Southern California Resort, North City, JPW Communications, Aleven-Hain Municipal Water District, Tri-City Medical Center, California State University San Marcos, Kaiser Permanente, Palomar Community College, Miracosta Community College, Mental Health Systems, and CW Driver. And finally, I want to thank all of SDNEDC investor companies. Your support makes it possible for us to produce events like this and to continue our work on core economic development activities, marketing North County, helping existing employers overcome challenges and expand, and connecting companies and educators to strengthen our region's workforce pipeline. Today, you're going to hear about recovery and growth. Kicking off our program will be Mark Vittner, Managing Director and Senior Economist from Wells Fargo Securities, with his national and state forecasts and his outlook on how those trends will impact San Diego. Next, we're excited to be joined by Elizabeth Schott, CEO of Accessity, Charlie Mercado, founder of Game Point Basketball, and Antonio Barbosa of Wells Fargo. Small businesses are the heart of North County, where 85% of our firms have less than 6 employees. COVID-19 required every single one of us and our businesses to pivot, and we're excited about a discussion about how one business made such a move, the support that groups like Accessity can provide to make that happen, and a small business perspective on 2021. Last but certainly not least, the summit today will wrap up with Josh Williams from DW Research, who will present this year's North County Indicators Report. We'll be taking questions today. Please think of any that you might have. You can post them in the questions section on Zoom, and at the end of the summit, we'll have some time to explore topics of interest to you. With those preliminaries out of the way, I'd like to introduce Wells Fargo's Josh Henderson, the District Manager for North County.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Henderson, and I serve as the North County Coast District Manager for Wells Fargo. And on behalf of Wells Fargo, we are thrilled you could join today as we discuss all the great things happening here in North County and some of the economic trends we are seeing as we power through 2021 and beyond. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to share a little on how we're continuing to serve our customers and communities during this unprecedented time. Wells Fargo is steadfast in its commitment to helping those small businesses hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, we announced our Open for Business Fund program, approximately $400 million small business recovery effort across the U.S. to help entrepreneurs recover and rebuild. The initiative focuses on increasing access to capital, technical expertise, and long-term resiliency programs, particularly for diverse small business owners and entrepreneurs. I'm proud to share that we recently awarded Accessity, formerly known as Accion, serving Southern California, with a $2 million Wells Fargo Open for Business Fund grant to help serve racially and ethnically diverse small business owners throughout San Diego, including here in North County. You'll be hearing more details later about the great work Accessity is doing through this program, but on behalf of Wells Fargo, I just want to thank you for all your support of our small business community. By working together, we can help save businesses and the jobs they provide in the region. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Wells Fargo's very own Mark Vittner. Mark Vittner is a managing director and senior economist for Wells Fargo's corporate and investment bank, where he is responsible for tracking U.S. and regional economic conditions. A writer for the department's weekly and monthly economic reports, Mark also produces regular publications on residential and consumer construction, regional economies, and issues affecting small business. Mark's commentary has been featured on the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg, among other publications. An Atlanta native, Mark earned a Bachelor of Business Administration in Economics from the University of Georgia and an MBA from the University of North Florida. He is here today to provide us with an economic outlook, and we are all thrilled to have him. Please join me in welcoming Mark Vittner.
Well, it's great to be back with you. We're going to go ahead and go through the outlook for the U.S. economy and the outlook for California and for Southern California and try to bring it down to North County. But to start off with, conditions right now are pretty good. The vaccinations are ramping up, and I know we had the big setback with Johnson & Johnson this morning, but there seems to be enough Pfizer and Moderna vaccine out there that, you know, I really think that by the end of April, everyone who wants to be vaccinated will have been vaccinated. And so in 3 more weeks, we should be able to reach that threshold, at least over 16. The 12 to 15-year-olds should start being vaccinated in May. And I think the biggest challenge that we'll have then is convincing some folks who don't want to be vaccinated to go ahead and get vaccinated. And that'll be a challenge for us. But in the meantime, the economy should be opening up. I mean, we are seeing that all states, including California, are beginning to open back up. And California and New York have probably lagged more than any other major state. But even among the states that opened up earlier, it's only been recently that we've seen a significant increase in the number of people that want to engage in the economy and are going out and dining out and beginning to venture out. When you look at economic growth, we started the year in pretty good shape. We had the stimulus plan that was passed in December, relief checks in January, and then the second plan that was passed in mid-March, and more relief checks at the end of March. It looks like first quarter growth is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5%. And then with all that stimulus hitting in mid-March, the current quarter, the second quarter looks like it's going to be 8.5%, and we've got 9% growth projected for the third quarter. It's going to be the strongest run of economic growth that we've seen since 1983. So it's, and we've got a little bit of a mini boom underway. Consumers are clearly in the driver's seat with those stimulus checks, with the expanded and extended unemployment benefits, with the savings that have been built up by upper income households. There's a lot of pent-up demand for discretionary services. Those discretionary services include discretionary healthcare. They include travel, restaurant dining, concerts, entertainment of all aspects. And we expect to see that really take off. There's also, I believe, a pent-up demand for housing, which and it has created, has really worsened the supply problems, because during the pandemic, very few people wanted to put their home for sale. Now, a lot of people don't want to put their home for sale because they're worried they're not going to be able to find another one. There's no problem selling houses. We just put out a report on Austin, Texas today, and they have like a 12-day supply of homes, or maybe it's a 4-day supply of homes. I don't know. It's a ridiculously low number, but nationally, 3/4 of all homes that are put on the market sell within a month. One of the things that we've seen in California is a return of the affordability migration. And in Southern California, that's meant two things. That's meant that folks have been moving to more suburban or outlying areas where the cost of housing is less expensive, or they've been moving to Phoenix or Las Vegas or Dallas or some other part of the country. Most of the folks that are moving away from high cost areas in California are remaining within California. They're just moving to lower cost areas within California. New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles and Chicago have probably gotten the most attention. And the one thing that has been evident in those cities that they're also dealing with some crime issues, chronic homeless issues, and kind of the basic breakdown of some services, and that's really pushing people away from the downtown areas. In terms of higher interest rates, there's some concern that inflation is going to come back, and this morning's numbers were a little problematic. My own personal view on inflation is that the Fed has been a little bit too optimistic. I think their story's correct. I think that for the most part, the inflationary pressures that we're going to see are going to be short-term or transitory. That's the word that they really like to use. But I think that those short-term transitory pressures are going to result in a higher level of inflation. And then when inflation comes back down, it's going to still be at a higher level than the Fed is expecting over the long run. And ultimately, that's going to bring about higher interest rates, but they're still going to be relatively low. This is not going to be a replay of what we saw in the 70s, in the early 80s, but we're more likely to see that inflation, instead of being a little bit below 2% over the course of the decade, is probably going to be above 2.5% through most of this decade, and probably hugging the 3% pace over the next couple of years. Those higher interest rates may cool off the housing market a little bit, but if you can get a mortgage under 4% and home prices are rising 12%, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put off buying a home because you're worried about interest rates. I mean, any interest rate below 4% is ridiculously low from a historic standpoint. In terms of the speed of the economic recovery, I said this is something we haven't seen since the early 1980s. One of the other ways that this stands out is if you look at the trend in GDP growth, you see the snapback that we had after the lockdowns ended and then the slower pace that we saw later last year. In terms of GDP, we will have completely recovered the losses that we incurred during the pandemic by the end of this summer. That is a much quicker recovery than we've seen in recent recessions, which have typically taken 18 months to 2 years. It took us the better part of 6 years to get back above our previous trend in GDP growth following the Great Recession. We're easily going to do this by the end of the summer. We may even do it by the 4th of July, but the numbers are reported on a quarterly basis, so we won't know that we did it until well after that. In terms of job growth, the recovery is not going to be as quick. For one thing, we've seen minimum wages increase across the country. The industry that was hit the hardest by the pandemic was the leisure and hospitality industry. And even with that higher minimum wage, the amount of income that an unemployed worker can get from state unemployment benefits plus the expanded federal unemployment benefits often exceed what can be earned by going back to work. And that's particularly true if you have transportation costs, if you got to pay for parking, gas, if you have childcare, that it's a real hard trade to get people back into the workforce. And in this morning's National Federation of Independent Business survey, a record number of firms said that they had difficulty staffing open positions, filling open positions. And what I'm hearing from a lot of businesses is that a lot of people are signing up saying, yeah, I'd love to come work there. And they're signing up for an interview and they're not showing up. They just want to get the interview so they can continue to get the unemployment benefits. And I've heard this from a large number of companies. So I think the recovery in employment is going to lag a little bit. From a longer term perspective, a lot of companies are investing in labor saving equipment. They're changing the way that they provide goods and services so that they can do it with fewer workers. And that's also likely to extend the period of time that it's going to take for the unemployment rate to get for employment growth to get back to where it was pre-pandemic. The recovery will still be quicker than what we saw after the Great Recession. As I mentioned, the housing market has seen this incredible drop in inventory, and it's really not much of a mystery. When the pandemic hit, folks showings were pretty much shut down across the country. Didn't have virtual showings yet. People didn't want to have people in their homes that they didn't know, that weren't part of their immediate family members, so they didn't want to show their homes. And at the same time, a lot of folks that lived in apartments suddenly needed more space, and they went out to look for homes. Folks that might have downsized in the past, maybe their kids had gone off to college or they'd gone off into the workforce somewhere else, had suddenly found that with the needs to work from home, or maybe their children returned home during the pandemic, that they didn't have that extra space. And so we saw fewer people putting their homes up for sale. So we've seen the sharpest drop in inventory that we've ever seen, going back to the 1990s when we began to see this consistent series. And that's led to a big surge in home prices, up about 12% year to year when you look at repeat sales indices. With the demand for housing real strong, construction's picking up, particularly in parts of the country where it is easier to build. And so Arizona and Nevada are seeing a really large pickup in construction. In Southern California, it's always difficult to build. It's quicker to build vertically than it is to build single family homes. And so we've seen a significant pickup in apartment permits, but not as much of a pickup in single family permits. Nationally, we're looking for home building to ramp up over the course of the decade. This year should be a very good year for single family housing. One of the problems though is they've got their own supply side pressures, and that lumber prices, you've heard, have skyrocketed. The cost of lumber that goes into a home adds about $24,000 to the cost of building a home. Just since the financial crisis, the regulatory cost, the fixed regulatory cost of building a home are up by about $50,000. So just lumber and regulatory cost adds $75,000 to the cost of building a home. I got to tell you that all other materials, whether it's piping, whether it's siding, wallboard, wiring, it's all more expensive. On average, it's up 9% over the last year. And so we're not likely to get much of a break in housing cost. In fact, supply bottlenecks are pushing up prices throughout the economy. It's one of the reasons that inflation has popped up. And the hope is that as the global economy recovers, that these supply bottlenecks will ease. My concern, however, is that we've had our own hiccups in getting folks vaccinated here in the US. It now looks like it's going to take even longer to get the world vaccinated. The hope was that the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Sinovac vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine would work well enough that the developing world would be able to use this and not have to build out the supply chain that's needed for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, which have to be kept cold. What we found out is that the Sinovac vaccine does not work well against the Brazilian variant. The AstraZeneca doesn't work as well against the Brazilian variant. Johnson & Johnson, I don't know what the evidence is on that, but they all have some difficulties. It's going to be a slower rollout for them globally. And I'm afraid it's going to take the better part of a year, maybe even 2 years before we get the world vaccinated. And I think that's going to keep a lot of pressure on supply chains and cause inflation to be a little more problematic. You see it in the chip industry with where chip manufacturers are scrambling for more capacity, and companies that need microchips are developing their own production pipelines because they're having such trouble securing microchips. So it is it's a problem that doesn't have a 6-month fix to it. It's a problem that's probably going to be with us for a couple of years. When you look at the inflation forecast from the Federal Reserve, it seems fairly optimistic given the size of the challenge, where they have inflation just rising up to a 2.5% annual rate. I think that on a temporary basis, we're going to see inflation exceed a 5% annual rate for 3 to 6 months. And we're already there. So, I mean, it's not a real leap. It's a 0.6% increase is in that 5 to 6% range. I think that that's where we're going to be for the next 5 or 6 months. And then we'll see the rate edge down to about 3%. That may cause some discomfort for the financial markets. It may lead to a little volatility in the financial markets. And I think it's going to put some upward pressure on interest rates. We have the 10-year Treasury ending the year around 2%, ending next year around 270, I believe. I would say that you could add another 0.5 percentage point to both of those is kind of, and that's probably the upper end of where we're likely to be. I mentioned that a lot of folks have been on the move. They've been seeking more affordable housing. We've seen a lot of companies move out of the Bay Area and out of Southern California to Texas. Austin, Texas has been one of the top choices. Austin is flat out booming. It's always rated as one of the best places to live, along with Denver. A lot of folks who like to be outdoors. It's real popular with young folks. The LinkedIn data, I think, are some of the most useful. They tell you that of every 10,000 LinkedIn members in Austin, 119 of them moved to Austin from some other part of the country within the last year. The number one place where they've moved there from is the San Francisco Bay Area. And you could look on the list, and San Francisco does rate as one of the best places to live, but it's not one of the places where you're seeing that folks are moving to. Personally, I don't know how San Francisco would come in ahead of San Diego. But if it was just where I could live and not have to worry about the cost of living, I would say that San Diego would have to be in the top 3. So it kind of surprises me that it's not there. I'd mentioned that the rate at which states reopened differed quite a bit. Out west, Utah and Idaho reopened their economies fairly quickly. They have already replaced all of the jobs that were lost last March and April during that initial lockdown. In California, we've only replaced 39% of the jobs that were lost during the lockdown. Now, Nevada, with all of its jobs in the leisure and hospitality sector, has done better than that at 54%. Nationally, we're around 60%. Other large states have done a little bit better than California. Illinois, 44%, New York, 46%, Texas, 59%, and Florida, 56%. And of course, Texas and Florida reopened much earlier. Now, looking within California as to which areas have recovered the most, they have tended to be the more agriculturally driven, least densely populated of the metropolitan areas. Redding's replaced 70% of the jobs that were lost, and Stockton is also 70%. The San Diego, Carlsbad areas replaced about 49% of the jobs that were lost. The more urban areas have struggled the most. San Francisco, just 31%. Los Angeles, just 29% of the jobs that were lost. They've struggled the most because they're very densely populated. It's very hard to socially distance. And both of San Francisco and Los Angeles have lost a lot of businesses to other parts of the country as well. In terms of San Diego, we lost 254,000 jobs during the initial lockdowns. You can see the shape of the recovery. We've added back just under half of that. San Diego County and North County in particular both have a lot of folks employed in the leisure and hospitality sector, and that's been where most of the job losses have been. The one area that we've seen some gains has been construction. A lot of construction activities continued to move along. Another area where we've seen a lot of job losses is other services. And I wish we could call it something else, but other services includes things like repair shops, hair salons, fitness centers, and dry cleaners and things of that sort. So like shoe repair shops, a lot of things where people need to be going into work to use. And if they're not going into the office every day, they don't necessarily have to go to the dry cleaners or get their shoes repaired. Job losses in most other parts of the economy have been diminishing. We've been adding back jobs in financial services. We've been adding back jobs in manufacturing as well. We've been adding back jobs in retail trade and in the transportation sector. So we have been adding back jobs in a lot of other areas. One area that has been very strong in terms of retail and in manufacturing has been sporting good equipment, outdoor, anything that has that can be done outdoors has done very, very well with people staying at home. Folks have been spending more money on sporting goods. That has been one of the lone bright spots in retail. Looking at some of the high frequency data, and this is something that came out of the pandemic, as we began to look at data that actually existed beforehand. It just wasn't compiled in a consistent way. We get data from Google and Apple that tells us how much time people are spending away from home and where they're going. And you can see that folks are spending more time at the grocery store. They're spending more time at restaurants and retail establishments in San Diego, but they're not really spending that much more time at work. It's kind of interesting. We haven't seen, after the initial recovery, it's pretty much flatlined. We saw it fall off again late last year when COVID cases picked up. Another bit of data that we have is the seated diner information that we get from Open Table. And you can see the recovery in California and the recovery in San Diego and the lesser recovery that we're seeing in Los Angeles, which is probably more dependent upon business travelers returning than the other markets. Looking at small business conditions in San Diego County, this is a chart that we updated this morning nationally, and what we've seen is that there's been a declining trend in the number of small businesses that have opened. Really, ever since the initial bounce back from the lockdowns, we've seen the number of small businesses that have been open continuously trend down, while revenues in San Diego have also trended down. Nationally, they've been flat. But what we're seeing in both areas is the loss in market share from independent businesses to either larger chain operators or to the national operators. So we've seen in the restaurant industry, we've seen a loss of folks who maybe had one or two restaurants, two restaurant groups that maybe have 24 restaurants, because those larger organizations are better able to move staff around. They have better access to funds to put in all the social distancing and safety equipment that they need at restaurants. And they've also can get economies of scale in implementing e-commerce into their business. And this has been a big challenge for small businesses. If you're not big enough where you can get the economies of scale to make those investments, you either squeeze your margins or you're losing market share to the folks that can. The trends in revenue do look a little bit better at the end of March. The trends in the number of open businesses have continued to trend lower, however. Looking at the housing market, as I mentioned, in San Diego County, we're seeing an uptick in apartments. Apartment development has been pretty strong. We have seen a little bit of a pivoting away from urban apartments to suburban apartments, either mid-rise or in some sort of a town center format that are mixed in with retailing and some light office. Very difficult to do single family development in San Diego, but we are plodding along at the same pace that we did prior to the pandemic currently. Home prices in San Diego up about 11% year to year, latest numbers in January. We don't have it on a chart on it, but this morning the Consumer Price Index came out. I believe nationally we're up 2.5% in San Diego. The latest CPI data for San Diego shows the cost of living up 4.1%. Housing is a big part of that. We've got our forecast going out through 2022. And as I mentioned, growth is going to be very strong over the next couple of quarters. I mean, these numbers, as high as they are, and for the year, we're looking for 6.4% growth For next year, it's 5.5% growth. I actually believe that in terms of growth, we're being conservative. I think that if we're going to be wrong, the numbers are likely to be higher than this, not lower. But I also think that the inflation numbers, where we're looking for about just under 3% inflation this year and 2.5% next year, I think those inflation numbers are also going to be higher because we're going to have stronger growth. And I think the global economy is going to take longer to come back. It also means that international tourism is also likely to take a little bit longer to come back. In terms of interest rates, they're headed higher, but not dramatically higher. I do think that the risk to long-term interest rates is probably about 0.5 percentage point more than what we have shown here. So that at the end of 2021, maybe we're at 255, 260. At the end of 2023, I would say that the risk is that we would be, 3 to 3.5 in that range, but we're not going to suddenly see that rates are going to be dramatically higher than that. So I'm going to stop there so that we have plenty of time to keep with our program and stop sharing my screen, and then listen to the rest of the program and be around to take questions later. Thank you very much.
Small businesses are the engine of growth for North County, where most of our businesses have less than 5 employees. Earlier this week, we had an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with Antonio Barbosa from Wells Fargo, Elizabeth Schott, CEO of Accessity, and Charlie Mercado, who's the president and founder of Game Point Basketball. Let's go ahead and we'll introduce our folks here on the Zoom. Antonio, if we could start with you, your name and your title and your organization.
Thank you, Eric. My name is Antonio Barbosa, and I'm the Wells Fargo Vice President of Public Affairs for the San Diego market. Wells Fargo is a diversified community-based financial service company founded in 1852. Wells Fargo provides banking, investment, and mortgage products and services, as well as consumer and commercial finance through more than 7,200 locations.
Great. Thanks. And Charlie, you're our small business owner, so tell us a little bit about yourself and the company that you operate and founded.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for having me. My name is Charlie Mercado. I'm the director of Game Point Basketball. Game Point was founded back in 2004, and we are a basketball development program. We provide recruiting assistance to players that are moving on from playing high school basketball to college basketball.
And Elizabeth?
Hi, yes, I'm Elizabeth Schott. I'm the CEO of Accessity, and Accessity is formerly Axion San Diego. So we've worked in the San Diego community for 27 years, and we are a nonprofit community development financial institution, so a CDFI. And our mission is really surrounded around opening doors of financial opportunity, both providing access to loans for small businesses, as well as a community of support and resources, ultimately to help them start or grow their businesses and support employment and the wonderful communities that we have here in San Diego.
So Elizabeth, let's kind of start with you. I mean, as you sort of said, this is a new name, and maybe tell us a little bit about, some of the things that Accessity has been doing and to think about how to support small businesses during the pandemic.
Yeah, so as you've talked about, Eric, small businesses are the economic engine of our local communities, and many of those, small businesses have, less than 10 employees. And so oftentimes those businesses need access to both financial means through loan programs, as well as a community of support resources. So whether that's education, whether it's training, whether it's connection to other governmental partners or other nonprofit partners that provide support and assistance for these small business owners. That's what Accessity has been all about for 27 years. And we primarily focus on both startup businesses as well as low to moderate income folks, as well as female entrepreneurs, veterans, other minority-owned businesses that for one reason or another may not have access through traditional means to get loans or connections to education and resources. And so what we're really doing is empowering them with the tools that they need to actually grow or start their businesses, and really connecting them with the resources possible to make their businesses successful and be a part of that support that they need. So in this COVID situation, you know, a lot of what we've been doing is directing people to different resources like grants and PPP loans, as well as keeping them informed about educational resources that are needed in this time as they pivot their businesses to different digital options. And then we've been administering some low interest loan products through the County of San Diego and San Diego Foundation with some funding from Wells Fargo, as well as through the State of California Rebuilding Loan Fund, that have really helped businesses with access to capital for stabilizing and recovery and relief during this challenging time.
And Elizabeth, I think that's something that sometimes people kind of forget, which is that, you know, as a community development financing entity like yourselves or other folks that are involved with helping companies gain and access capital, you really add additional value, or a lot more value than just writing a check and a loan. It's really becoming a partner with them to connect them to the resources that are available to them. And I think you mentioned some of those things. Any successes that you really sort of, things that you learned in the COVID period about making those connections and how they add value?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of times it's about, you know, finding and being aware and educated about the resources that are available. And that's one of the things that we focus on at Accessity, is that we really are here. If we don't necessarily have the answer for the small business through the services that we provide, we do our best to connect them to all the different resources, whether that's through our government agencies, through other nonprofit partners, through our banking institutions, really to create a one-stop shop where a small business owner can not only get the access to capital that they need, but the community of support. And being a CDFI, we are more flexible than a traditional bank is going to be with our lending criteria, really enabling for criteria that meets that small business owner where they are in that particular moment in the growth or startup of their business, so that we can ultimately help them with that access to capital and the education that they need to sustain or to grow or to start their business.
Now, Charlie, you're one of those small businesses that, you know, was operating before COVID, had to deal with the crisis, worked with Accessity and Wells Fargo. Tell us a little bit about Game Point Basketball, your background, and kind of what you guys are doing, both, you know, before the pandemic and now how you've pivoted your business as you move forward to 2020, 2021.
Yeah, so you know, Game Point Basketball was a program I started back in 2004 after I graduated from college. You know, my background in the game of basketball, I'm a 1998 graduate of Vista High School, played 2 years at Palomar College, and then I received a basketball scholarship to a small liberal arts college called Bethany College out in central Kansas. And so when I came back in 04, I really wanted to do something for the community where I could provide kids an opportunity to develop their basketball skills, and at the same time give them access to and learn about opportunities to play college basketball, whether that was playing at the community college level, whether that's at, you know, at the Pac-12 level, or whether that's a small Division III school somewhere in the Midwest. So, you know, we started in 04, 17 years later, we've helped put over 100 kids in college on scholarship. Whether it's, you know, kids, we have a kid at Stanford, or whether it's the Pac-12, we have currently 4 kids playing basketball in the Ivy League. And then we have kids at schools such as MIT. So, you know, before COVID and the pandemic kind of hit, we were doing a lot of our practices and workouts here at Maricosta College in Oceanside. And when the pandemic hit, you know, we were forced to shut down. We really didn't get back into a gym in June, which we were fortunate to find a place down in Encinitas. The Boys and Girls Club took us in and allowed us to come in and do workouts. And, you know, now as we've kind of gone through this COVID thing, you know, we've been forced to kind of do some workouts outside. But we've been extremely blessed. You know, companies like Accessity have come in and helped us. We have 11 coaches on our staff, you know, all part-time, obviously. A lot of the coaches on our staff are varsity or high school coaches here in the area. And so having access to capital and funds has given us an opportunity, you know, to keep those coaches employed and help them, stay connected to the kids that we coach. So our program, we start as low as third grade kids and we go all the way up to high school seniors. And then as they get into the high school, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors, we also have a recruiting assistance program that helps them with their athletic and academic guidelines to make sure that they are eligible to get into college. And then obviously we do, evaluations from a basketball standpoint to kind of give them an idea of where they would have an opportunity to play.
I would think as a small business owner, I mean, one of the biggest pivots that you must have had to make is thinking through, here was a business model that was founded first and foremost on face-to-face interaction with your mentors, the people, or mentees, the people that you're working with, and as well teammates interacting with each other face-to-face on a basketball court. You must have had to really pivot quickly to thinking about how you could leverage online tools to communicate and to continue that connection with your folks that you're working with.
Yeah, no question. It was extremely difficult. One of the greatest one of our greatest strengths is our interaction and connecting with players. And anybody would see that by the workouts and the practices and the workouts that we host. So getting used to kind of talking more on Zoom calls, and we were hosting workouts on Zoom calls, and not really being there to kind of like physically, whether it's just a person talking and coaching them through certain things. So yeah, it was an adjustment, but it was one that, we had to do. And I think, myself and the rest of our staff have done a tremendous job of adapting to some of these new things that we've had to do. Even in the gyms, now that we're back in the gym, coaches are wearing masks, and, we're working with smaller groups now. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for us, even financially, because now we've had, we're paying for more gym time because we can't have as many kids in the gym. So, we're excited to kind of be back doing what we're doing. And accessity, we're also our small business, we bank with Wells Fargo, and they've been great for us as well as in making sure that we have access to certain things. But yeah, no, to answer your question, yes, it was difficult not to be face to face and have interaction, but I think we did a good job of adapting to that and making sure our kids still had access to the right workouts and getting the proper education.
And Charlie, do you think that there were, one of the things that we've heard from small businesses, and I'd love to see if Antonio and Elizabeth have other experiences or other examples that they share. One of the things that we've heard is that, some of the changes that you've made, some of the things that you had to do in adapting over the last 14 months, that those were innovations that you may take, either continue on, or which have given you new thinking about, how to operate the business. Anything that you think will be kind of changes that you made that'll have a lasting influence on the business model at GamePoint?
Yeah. So one of the things that we started doing, and I don't know how I didn't think about this before, but one of our things that we're really happy about, excited about, is our culture that we have here at GamePoint. And one of the ways we do that is, our older players who interact with our younger guys. So what we started doing to keep kind of kids motivated and kind of keep kids working, whether they're out in their driveway working out on their outdoor court, is, we have players that are currently in college. So one of the things that we started doing is bringing in Yale's point guard last year, is a former GamePoint player. He graduated from St. Augustine High School. He currently works now for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And what we started doing is bringing those guys in to kind of talk to our younger guys. And, we would have, 150 of our players on a Zoom call, while some of our former players who have had success, and they're bringing them in and kind of talking to them about, the challenges they had as a high school player, a young player, and then giving them some guidance on, hey, if this is what they want to do, this is what they're going to need to do in the classroom and on the court.
And that's really interesting, because that's not necessarily something that, that gives you guys a competitive advantage in the marketplace. You've got an alumni network that can communicate with your current players and your current clients. And it would be, cost prohibitive or difficult to fly those guys out to do, a one-on-one in the gym, but the new technology really provides you that opportunity. Antonio, we haven't heard from you, and thinking about that example of, businesses pivoting. First, let me ask you, tell me a little bit about the program that you and Elizabeth have been working with. And then, maybe, second follow-up question, have you found examples where Wells clients have made some innovation that they needed to do because of the pandemic that may have lasting impacts on their business model?
Yes, Eric. Well, the program is called the Wells Fargo Open for Business Fund, and it boosts access to capital, technical expertise, and long-term resiliency programs for minority-owned businesses. We launched the program for business fund in 2020 with a $400 million small business recovery effort across the US to help entrepreneurs hardest hit by COVID-19. Today, the Open for Business Fund has deployed more than 84 million in philanthropic capital to community development financial institutions, CDFIs. And locally, Wells Fargo granted $2 million from the Open for Business Fund to Accessity to help their ability to provide loans to small businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic in Imperial, Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego counties. And I'll let Elizabeth share more about the program and the specifics.
Yeah, Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about Open for Business?
Absolutely, happy to. Yeah, so we've been able to, with that capital and that grant from Wells Fargo, we were able to start a loan fund that was specifically designed for a low interest recovery and relief product for racially and ethnically diverse businesses here across Southern California. And Charlie was able to access a loan through that program. And so it's been wonderful because obviously with the pandemic, there's been lots of businesses that have had to pivot, Eric, to your point, and needed to stabilize during this time, either needed new equipment or new cleaning supplies, or, you know, Charlie mentioned having to have more space in their location so that they could have the physical distancing. And with this type of fund from Wells Fargo's support, we were able to create a fund that's now supported almost $1.4 million within access to capital and loans to almost 100 businesses thus far, in supporting them through the opportunity to, you know, stabilize their businesses and if they were impacted negatively by the COVID situation. And so it's really allowed us an opportunity to reach out to the community and support more access to capital for these businesses. And to your earlier comment about how businesses have pivoted, there's lots of examples where businesses, you know, quickly had to get e-commerce onto their, you know, websites and had to do, you know, pickup options curbside or delivery. And maybe as a previous business, they didn't have that as part of their business model, but they quickly pivoted. And now those models will enable them to continue that model into the future if they choose to, if it's more efficient. And so I think there's been a lot of opportunity for innovation and inspiration. And there's also been businesses that have struggled, right? And so, you know, our organization is here to point people into the right direction for various resources to help them either restabilize or to access the capital that they need moving forward.
That's great. Antonio, as you guys think about Wells Fargo in 2021 and really the companies that you work with at Wells, what's your outlook for the rest of the year? I mean, do you think we're gonna how do you see quarters 3 and 4 progressing as we move out of the pandemic? And are you excited about, you know, the prospects for Wells clients moving forward next year?
Yes, very well. And I'm going to leave the outlook predictions to the economists. I think you're going to have a great expert today. So, but I can assure you that we will continue working hard as a company in partnership with local nonprofit organizations like Accessity to help our small business succeed and to be ready to emerge from the COVID-19 shutdowns. As Elizabeth was mentioning, I think innovation and adaptation is the key for 2021.
And Charlie, how do you see the rest of the year going for you guys at GamePoint now that you're more back in the gym and things are moving forward?
Yeah, we're extremely excited. We're working on a project right now that I feel is going to be a game changer for us. You know, one of the biggest problems with the pandemic is, you know, we don't have a place that we call our own, meaning, you know, we rent gym space from other schools or, you know, private centers. So we're working on a project right now that is going to help us pretty much have access to a gym 24/7. And so, you know, we're excited about the future of GamePoint, and we're extremely grateful for all the assistance that, you know, Accessity has given us to kind of get through that time and help us have a brighter future in 21.
And Elizabeth, you must be excited. You're entering the second half of 2021 with a new name, an old big partner that's been great for North County. But how do you see the rest of the year working for your organization?
Yeah, so I think we're going to continue to see small businesses innovate, and as things reopen, I think that people are going to start to see more activity and more need. But we're looking at really having an opportunity in partnership with our philanthropic and governmental partners to deliver our historical loan programs that are helping businesses to start and to grow if that's the situation that they're in. But we also look at this as an opportunity to continue to working with our partners for recovery efforts, maybe the low interest loans, and getting information out there about other grant programs and things, because I think there's going to need to still be a combination of the two as we all experience the recovery coming out of this. And there may be times where different resources are needed, and so we're looking forward to working in partnership. And I think we're also going to see a lot of government and nonprofit partners working more collaboratively together so that we can ultimately create innovative programs like the one we did with Wells Fargo Open for Business to really reach these really important small business owners that are making such a contribution in our community as far as employment and keeping local dollars in our local communities and economies. So I think there's a lot to look forward to, and I think we're also going to, and truthfully, still experience some hardship, and we're here to support those small businesses through that.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't let you guys have that opportunity here as we close. Charlie, for more information for folks that are interested in GamePoint, what's your website? How can they reach you?
Yeah, just gamepointbball.com, or you could just just Google GamePoint basketball. It'll come right up.
Excellent. And Elizabeth, for you, how do people now reach the new organization?
Yes, it's accessity.org. And so that's accessity.org. And what I would share is that there's information, and small business owners can apply directly online for any of our loan products, whether they're COVID relief and recovery or whether they're our regular loan products. There's also a lot of education and training and education workshop information on our website, as well as a COVID-19 button that they can find resources for other grant programs or the PPP program that small business owners may be looking for during this time.
And Antonio, of course, is one of the largest financial institutions in not only the country, but in the world. I'm sure people know where to sort of find their Wells Fargo branch. But where can they find more information about the philanthropic partnership that you've been doing with Accessity and with other philanthropic partners around the country?
Yeah, at wellsfargo.com, they can do some research about products and services, and all the information about the program is right there too. So again, wellsfargo.com, and for product services and resources.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank the three of you for coming on today and giving us an opportunity to learn more about one small business in North County, and then the various support organizations that are out there to help small businesses thrive in 2021 and the years beyond. So thank you very much. On behalf of the entire board of directors of the San Diego North Economic Development Corporation, I want to thank Elizabeth, Charles, and Antonio for that insightful conversation about small businesses. It's next my distinct pleasure to introduce Josh Williams. Josh is founder, president, and principal researcher for BW Research. He has been a leading at directing applied workforce and economic research for almost 20 years. And his research deliverables are focused on supporting decision makers with evidence-based conclusions and recommendations. Josh is also quickly becoming Mr. North County Rugby, with two sons who have played the sport, a wonderful wife who serves our community as a trustee for the Carlsbad Unified School District, and a fellow data geek. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce SDNED Special Advisor Josh Williams for another update on North County indicators.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be back for the 8th North County Indicators. It's been through lots of evolutions, but I really am thankful to Eric and everybody at SDNEDC for pulling this together. For the North County indicators this year, we really focused on doing three things. We want to give you kind of an overview. For many of you, this will be old hat, but talk about kind of what North County indicators is and why it's important. We want to go over a lot of data and a lot of new information about kind of how our community and our region is really responding to the pandemic. And then we want to talk about what's next for North County and what we're looking at, what are the questions we're asking, what are some of the strategies and considerations we're thinking about for North County over the next 6, 12, 18, and 24 months. So with that, we will jump right into it. North County indicators, or now, of course, the acronym NCI, is really a quantitative set of metrics that really help describe where North County's economy is at. The indicators have really evolved over the last 8 years. From, I think we started with 16 indicators to now we're up to about 47 metrics and 76 data sets that really represent North County's economy and really in 5 areas. And really, North County, NCI is hopefully doing a few things. It's providing a resource and a reference guide, so all of us can look and kind of understand, where the jobs are, where people are living, and give you an understanding of what North County's economy looks like. We also want it to be a tool to track the changes in the economy and look at how North County is evolving over time. It should be an asset to identify strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. And lastly, and for me maybe most importantly, I hope it provides a baseline to start a community dialogue in terms of how do we strengthen and improve North County both as an economy, but also as a place to live and really connecting the different communities that make up our region. When we talk about North County, we're talking about the 9 different cities and large unincorporated areas. And you can see on the map here, really the southern border is, the 56 freeway goes all the way up the coast, all the way up really to Camp Pendleton, and then out east to the San Diego County border, out to Borrego Springs and the desert out there. So that really is North County when we talk about it. And really is right before we jump into the actual data, we have indicators that really look at the people, and they give you a sense of the population, the demographics, the household income of our North County residents, looking at the economy, and really looking at how employment and industry clusters and wages are all evolving. We're looking at innovation and really different tracks of business births and death rates, research and development, venture capital, things like that. We spend a lot of time looking at education, and I will say our education metrics this year were a little bit challenged. We don't have a lot of the standardized testing data, but we still, as best we could, we maintain those metrics. And then lastly, things related to place, whether we're talking about housing, transportation, commercial real estate, and things like water. So with that, let's actually jump into the data. So I think, in the current environment, there's been a lot of talk about, COVID and vaccination rates. As of about 10 days ago, the number of now North County residents that had received at least one shot of the vaccine was about 37%, which was just below San Diego County's average of about 39%, but actually above California's vaccination rate. And when we look at kind of the vaccination rates, you can see that your southwestern kind of part of North County, Del Mar, Solana Beach, that area had vaccination rates at 50%, or even some of the zip codes are even above 50%. As you move further north and really further east, the vaccination rates were lower, and were somewhat of a proxy that your more rural, your less affluent communities had vaccination rates about half of what their more affluent neighbors had. I think if we look at kind of the impact of the economy from COVID, we saw that North County lost about 24,000 jobs kind of between the end of 2019 and the beginning and to the end of 2020. Job losses were about 5%, which was higher than California, but actually a little bit better than both Orange County and Los Angeles County experienced. North County's unemployment rate is about 7.5%, which is actually lower than the rest of San Diego County. I think when we start looking at and talking about North County, the industry clusters are really important. And one of the things we saw is that this really was a bifurcated impact in the economy. Some of our higher wage and higher concentration industries like biotechnology and biomedical devices, defense, aerospace, transportation, manufacturing, ICT or information and communication technologies, those industries have all actually recovered and have gained jobs between kind of the beginning of 2020 and the end of 2020. Lower wage are some of our lower wage and high concentration industries like agriculture and food had a very different experience than tourism, hospitality, and recreation, which was one of the hardest hit of the industries that we look at in North County. So we looked at we split it up a little differently this year. We split the industry clusters into 3 groups. The first group that I'm showing you right now is really those that were hit hardest by the pandemic. And really, these are all industries that saw losses of over 5% in employment. And, tourism, hospitality, recreation was closer to 20%. 1 in 5 jobs was lost. And we are starting to see some recovery, but these are really the ones that really were hit hardest. The other services include things like dry cleaning and other personal services. Retail is another industry that was really negatively impacted. Education, knowledge creation, and then traditional information and communications. So that would include newspapers, television, things like that. These have all lost over 5% of the jobs. So these are really the industries that are hardest hit. In our kind of our moderately impacted industries, these are industries that lost anywhere from just at, maybe they didn't lose anything, maybe they're at 0%, or they lost up to 3%. This is the kind of impact we'd expect from maybe a moderate recession. And you can see that building and design, professional and business service, logistics, finance, insurance, and real estate, even healthcare lost or was just at kind of a break even in terms of where their employment was. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we see industry clusters that really actually grew. Agriculture and food saw a small increase, but public services and infrastructure really looks at your utilities, water and electricity. Those grew, but really biotechnology and biomedical devices and information communication technologies all saw increases in employment of over 2%. One of the nice things is these are also some of your higher paying, with average earnings over $120,000 a year. So really varied impact. And there's industries and households that really saw little to no impact from the pandemic, and other ones that were really hit significantly. And we need to kind of be aware of that as we look at kind of the different experience that households and industries and employers felt. One of the things, those of you that have listened to kind of this presentation before know I spend a lot of time thinking about job quality. Too often we think about jobs as just kind of a job, but the reality is we know that's not the case, particularly in a place like North County where the cost of living is higher, where housing costs are higher. Tier 1 jobs typically represent our higher wage positions that typically have a median earnings of just under 100,000, anywhere between 90 to 100,000. And these jobs have grown by 10% from 2015 to 2020, and they represent about almost a quarter of all North County jobs. Tier 2 jobs are your middle wage positions that have median earnings of about 50,000, and they've grown about 5% over that same kind of 5-year period, and they represent, again, about a quarter of all jobs in North County. About half of the jobs in North County are Tier 3 jobs, and these are our lower wage positions that typically have earnings of about $30,000 a year. And they've declined over 1% over that same 2015 to 2020. But really, all of that decline has been in the last year. Tier 3 jobs have been hit hardest, and they represent just over half of jobs in North County. And we can see on this next slide, the green bar is those Tier 1 jobs. And you can see, if we look at growth from over the last 5 years, they've dropped, and all of the drop really has been in the last 2 or 3 years, but really, obviously the pandemic, they were hit hardest. Tier 2 jobs, saw less of a drop, and Tier 1 jobs have been growing. While that's good in the sense that we have these higher wage jobs have been more resilient, it's also a little scary in that the households that have really been least able to kind of deal with and handle the pandemic have been hit hardest. And that's something that we want to think about as we think about kind of recovery and moving out of kind of the pandemic economy. I think we're actually, Eric and I are busily finishing North County indicators. So one of the things the presentation is to kind of let you know this report that's coming out, I think, next week. the people's indicators really look at the demographic profile. They look at the percentage of residents with healthcare insurance and median household income. So there's a host of indicators that we look at to kind of represent where our residents are doing. And we can see one of the good measures, and a lot of the demographic data tends to be a year behind. So it doesn't show us where we're at kind of post-pandemic, but you can see one of the good signs that we're seeing in North County is the decline in those that don't have healthcare insurance. And we've seen that over the last 5 years drop from about 13% down to 7%, almost cut in half. Median household incomes have grown. And again, this is through 2019, so we're not seeing all the impact of the pandemic. But my expectation is that for a lot of households, their median household income probably did increase, while our lower income households probably saw a considerable decline. But North County is growing. Its median household income is growing faster than either the rest of San Diego County or California as a whole. Median household when we compare it to like Orange County or LA or even California, again, North County's incomes are growing faster than all of those. The only kind of big comparison is Santa Clara County, and that is one of the areas that is growing faster, but one of the few that's growing faster than our region. One of the other interesting things is we're seeing a demographic change in the profile of our residents. Over the last 5 years, we've seen the number of residents in North County between the ages of 65 to 74 increase by 25%, significant increase. While your 18 to 24 have actually declined, your 25 to 34 and really a lot of your working age, those individuals that really focus on work are either growing really slightly or even declining. And this is actually a concern. And even though we have higher levels of unemployment right now, our available level of kind of the workforce is declining while our retirement population is increasing. And that will have implications over the next 2, 3, and 5 years. One of the areas where that's not the case is the Latino or Hispanic population is actually increasing. And they tend to be where we're going to see an increase in that 18 to 44 and even 18 to 54 population that'll be working in North County over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years. So we've seen, again, the population, 1824, has declined, while we've seen a considerable increase in that 65 to 74-year-old increase. And that'll continue, we expect, over the next 2 or 3 years. And really, the Hispanic or Latino population is really the only demographic that we're seeing consistent growth in really every age group. That will have an impact, and we start thinking about kind of workforce availability moving forward. The North County indicators do spend a lot of time looking at some of what we call the place indicators, looking at cost of housing and rentals, looking at commute patterns and transportation preferences, looking at water usage. We can see that median home prices in North County have increased by 25% between 25 and 2019, and more recent data we're seeing that trend to continue, growing at a larger rate than either the rest of San Diego County or California as a whole. One of the interesting things that we have that does run through 2020 and through the pandemic, we actually saw what we wouldn't expect, really investment in North County's venture capital and early investments in regional businesses, and then business birth rates and death rates. But one of the things we've seen that's really interesting is in 2020, we actually saw a pretty significant increase in venture capital in North County. Now, a lot of that increase was one company, but even if we took that company out, you would still see overall early investment in North County businesses increasing through the pandemic, which may be counterintuitive, but I think people really see North County's continual growth as a place of growing kind of high quality innovative companies and tier 1 jobs as a really good indicator for the future and for the recovery from the pandemic. So I think I've thrown a fair bit of data at you, but I think one of the things that I'd like to do, and I wish I was in a room and we could talk together, but what are the questions? What does this mean for us? And what are the things we're thinking about? So one of the things that there's been a lot of talk both nationally within the state, but even within our region of infrastructure. And what are North County's infrastructure needs? As we think about transportation, as we think about kind of online access and bandwidth, healthcare, the electrical grid, water, and are we resilient to the droughts and things like that? So really thinking about and understanding our transportation needs as we recognize that we will have, some sort of economic probably impact, negative detrimental impact in the next 10 years. They seem to be happening to us. How are we able to respond to that? And what infrastructure do we need to respond stronger and be more resilient? I think one of the other challenges we have, how do we support transitioning workers and students who are entering the job market? How do we support those that really need to get back to work now? How do we transition people that are in declining pathways to growing pathways? What are the new skills and abilities that really workers are looking for that need to be developed in this, in the volatility? I think one of the things we've seen in the last year, there's been more change in North County, California, the national labor market than we really saw the 10 years before that. So how do we respond to that? And how do we help workers and students kind of make that change? How do we look at and support North County's employers and entrepreneurs, particularly in some of those industries that have been really impacted and seen a lot of volatility, whether that's tourism and hospitality, some of the other services, and and then some of the emerging and innovative industries, and some of those where that venture capital is going. These are all questions that we're asking. I think one of the other slides that I think is important to remember is while North County is generally considered and is, an above average and affluent community, there are pockets and there are communities of really high poverty. We have some zip codes that have over 1 in 3 households are living in poverty. When you're living in poverty in North County, that's really tough because it's such an expensive place to live. Our cost of living is much higher than the national average, yet the poverty indicator, again, is a national metric. So if you're living in poverty in North County, you're struggling. It's just a more expensive place to live than the rest of the nation on average. And so how do we think about creating economic opportunities for those communities that have hit hardest by the pandemic? Whether we're talking about education and training, whether we're looking at entry-level employment, or even looking at kind of, advancement in entrepreneurship. So what are some of the strategies that we would recommend? I think we talked a little bit about this last year, but we think this is one of North County's real strengths is its regional capacity as a research development hub, and really some of its science-based solutions to deal with things like weather and drought and seismic activity, and who knows, hopefully not the next pandemic for a while, but we need to be prepared for that. And North County's investment in some of these cool science-based emerging innovation-based industries are an important strength of our region and one we need to continue to build upon. There are going to be opportunities for supply chains. I think Mark Vittner earlier talked about some of the disruptions of supply chains. And we've done some work in employers in California. And over 40% of businesses said they're reevaluating their supply chain. We think some of the key industries like information and communication technologies, defense, aerospace, and transportation manufacturing, biotechnology, and even some of the action sports all have opportunities to kind of reevaluate their supply chains, and particularly look for some of the complementary businesses in North County. I think we need to continue this conversation around how do we examine and invest in regional economic resiliency. How do we resist or minimize the economic impacts of a shock event, and then also how do we recover quickly from such an event? We've looked at industry cluster for diversification. This is really important, but also looking at households and household level financial stability. Again, overall, North County has a pretty high level of debt to income ratio by household, but there are communities and pockets that really don't. I think, again, making sure that we're supporting economic agility, entrepreneurship, and innovation is also really important. And again, this infrastructure around volatile weather events, pandemics, and seismic activity. There will be transitioning to lower carbon economies. What opportunities does that provide for us? And what infrastructure is needed, in transportation, in healthcare, in bandwidth to be able to make that happen. And then I think rebuilding and strengthening the tourism and hospitality economy. This is an important part of North County's ecosystem, not just because it provides jobs, but because it's an important part of kind of protecting and maintaining our high quality of life. So one of the things we have to, and I think Mark shared quite a bit of optimism. I believe there's parts of the tourism economy that are going to come back strong and quickly, but there's other parts that won't. Things related to food and beverage and accommodations, we're already seeing increased movement of that. While other areas, particularly things with events and conferences and international travel, are probably 6 to 12 to maybe even 24 months after really recovering. How do we look at strategies to kind of support different parts of the tourism economy? And how do we provide training and support services for those workers that have not been able to get back to work because that employment hasn't come back? I think the other, the reality is in the long term, rising sea levels are something that could have an impact on our important beaches. How do we deal with that? How do we think about that and begin to kind of plan around some of those challenges? I think there's been a lot of talk, and I think we need to be thinking about education and upskilling workers. So how can North County protect one of its most valuable resources? I think at the end of the day, people come and want to live in San Diego because of its quality of life. But if the education isn't strong, people won't stay. And so I think it's really important that we continue to invest and think about how we support North County's education, and also thinking about how we support workers and individuals that are transitioning from maybe a declining employment pathway to an increasing one. Again, we've talked about local investment in the region's K-12 system, collaborating between schools and really looking at how the world of work is changing and providing support for teachers and new learning environments, connecting universities and colleges with kind of this new world of work. I think one of the things that, and again, as Eric said, I am a data geek, but as we all are, and I think to really make good decisions around education, we need data. And one of the challenges is in the pandemic, a lot of the standardized testing has gone away. And I think there's an argument to be said that we can improve standardized testing, but we need to recognize that our students are entering a global and competitive marketplace and not a closed and local one. And we need those measures of how students are doing in terms of their language proficiency, in terms of their quantitative skills, in terms of their logic and reasoning. And that that's an important part. Those tests provide us data to really assess where we're at on that. Lastly, I think we can't talk about North County and its future without thinking about how we can solve some of the challenges around housing. We saw earlier demographics, how our 18 to 24 and really, our younger families are leaving and moving out of North County. And a lot of that's related to the housing and housing costs. How do we meet the housing needs of the workforce and the workers that we need to support our businesses, but challenges around homelessness and making sure that at the other end of the spectrum that we're attracting entrepreneurs and talents while protecting North County's quality of life. Housing is really a big challenge that we need to look at and see how we're going to solve as a region. So again, hopefully lots of information. Do I get to turn it over to Eric? Yes, can I do that? Thank you.
I hope you guys enjoyed those presentations from both Josh and Mark. Again, if you're interested in getting the hard copy of Josh's report, we will send out to all the registrants a way for you to do that if you didn't purchase one when you registered. All SDNEDC investors will be getting at least one hard copy of the report. And for those of you that aren't investors, again, there'll be information that'll be going out later today. We've got some opportunities and times for questions and answers. We've gotten some that are in chat. Mark's going to be joining us. Josh will be as well. So we're going to try and see how we can work technology from different locations, 3,000 miles around the country. And so, Mark, I wanted to start with you. And so one of the things, we heard about it at an SDNEDC webinar a couple months ago. Obviously, there have been some discussions about the whole idea about how the pandemic is going to change the way that people are going to work. That we've gotten comfortable with the technology of Zoom, maybe not on this webinar, but in general, that we've had an opportunity for that, that people enjoy remote work. As your own research has said, people are doing some migration away from higher cost areas to lower cost areas in the country. Their job may not have migrated, but they have, so that they're now working remotely either full or most time. How do you see this playing out in the office market? And I guess, again, given Wells' position, you're obviously having to advise clients both on the direct side and then as well on the financing side, how you're thinking about office as a product and as an asset class.
Yeah, and it's been a question ever since the pandemic came upon us. And, my sense is it's a little bit of everything, but the underlying theme is that most of the folks that worked in an office environment pre-pandemic are going to be working in an office environment post-pandemic. And when I say most, it's at least 85 to 90%. It's somewhere in that ballpark, but that's a lot of folks that used to work in an office that aren't. So it's, of those people that are working that go back to work in the office, they're going to find that they have a little bit more space. They're not going to be, social distancing is going to be with us for some time, because we're not quite sure what the future of COVID is going to be. We don't know if the vaccine is going to last for a year, 2 years, 5 years. Just a kind of a side on pandemics. A lot of people think back to the Spanish flu, but we had I think it was called either the Hong Kong flu or the Asian flu. I get them mixed up. One occurred in 1957. It was about 2/3 as bad as this in terms of the number of people that were killed in the United States, and globally it was worse. And that was in 1957. It came back, a derivative of that came back in 1968, so 11 years from now. So I think that a lot of the social distancing protocols that have been put in place, they'll be relaxed somewhat, but they're not going to go away. So fewer people working in an office building, but using more space. The other thing that's happened though is a lot of folks, particularly older folks and younger folks. So it's not really the folks in the middle. They've got a lot of career ahead of them. They're kind of set in their ways. They're going to be, they know what their career path is. They don't want to take that many risks. But younger people and older people have set off for vacation destinations. And you see that in San Diego, home prices are up 11%. But if you go to Utah and you'll see that home prices are up 30%. Not in Salt Lake City, but in the resort areas of Utah, they're up 30%. And most resort markets have seen home prices rise 2.5 to 3 times as much, because folks went out there at the early days of the pandemic to work remotely, and then they went out and bought a place. And so I think a lot of those folks are going to continue to work remotely. Zoom is widely accepted, and people are comfortable enough with it, even with the hiccups that we have. I mean, it doesn't, and I think that a lot of folks will choose to work remotely. It's a choice that I don't think everybody will get to make, though. I mean, not every office worker is going to get to make that. The last thing I'd mention about this, though, is that, 2 things I'd mention here, the last 2 things I'll mention. One is we are already seeing more activity in the office market, where companies are going in and leasing space. Now, some companies are reducing their space, but we already are seeing that a lot of firms feel like that rents have nearly bottomed. They've got a lot of choices, and we're seeing some activity pick up. The other thing that I was going to say is that over the longer run, I think this is going to be very good for the labor market, because folks that would have gone out and gotten a job, but didn't because they had childcare responsibilities, or they had some other limitation. Maybe it was a physical handicap that would have made it very costly, very difficult for them to commute into work. They now have a new option to work remotely. And I think that will enable the labor force to be larger than it would be otherwise. So I think on net, it's going to be a very good thing. But in the short run, high-rise office buildings are going to face some challenges figuring out how we're going to go back to work in a high-rise.
Great. Mark, thanks so much for that. Josh, one of the things that your research has really focused a lot on is this notion about workforce and skill training, kind of, career pathways. And I wondered if you could sort of comment on the issue about the retail apocalypse. Mark's data showed that small business formation is suffering. And yet one of the things that we know is that retail as a sector typically creates maybe not the highest paying jobs, but creates a lot of jobs, right? It's a lot of quantity of jobs, and it provides opportunities for people to gain workplace skills, work sort of experience, oftentimes as they progress through their careers, maybe into another sector. As you think about it at BW Research and think about for North County, what are we going to look for the jobs, kind of that career pathway? What's going to replace retail jobs, or do we need to think about new ways that we provide people opportunities to learn customer service, diligence, the basic workforce skills?
A lot of the first jobs that people have are not only in retail. The other one that was really impacted was tourism, right? Tourism, hospitality, and a lot of those jobs really were hit. So a lot of people's first jobs they lost, and a lot of the what we call the kind of the non-technical skills, it's also called soft skills. A lot of students and kind of early entrance into the workplace we're not getting. So let me, I think there are opportunities that we need to be thinking about, in building and design. One of the areas that we're looking at is there's a real need for technology in kind of non-technology industries, right? So maybe, that's another area where we think there's an entryway, and we think tourism is going to come back quickly, and there will be opportunities for people in kind of a new tourism that's really more focused on serving, non-international, but you're going to have a lot of pent-up demand to get back out and to kind of enjoy that kind of quality of life experience. And I think that's something that we need to be thinking about in North County. I think the other thing that we need to be telling students, they need to be aware that there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of the job kind of career pathways that we thought were there are changing. And I think continuing to focus on educational attainment so they have more opportunities, but also making sure that students and job seekers recognize that they need to learn how to learn, and being ready to be aware of the kind of the changes in the workplace. So kind of a long-winded answer, but I think there's opportunities in building and design, in healthcare, in what Nate, one of my fellow researchers, called technology jobs in non-technology industries.
Question that came in. One of the things that your research has done, one of the things that you've focused a lot on, is this notion of green jobs and energy. You talked a little bit about notions of infrastructure building in North County. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about, given the specifics of North County, coastal community, not necessarily a lot of places for big, huge solar farms, what are some of the opportunities that you see in the green jobs area in North County?
Yeah, I think there is, we're spending a lot of time looking at how economies are transitioning from, a higher carbon footprint to a lower carbon footprint. And North County has about 15,000 jobs in clean energy, and whether that's renewable energy generation, whether that's energy efficiency, building retrofits, energy storage, some of the new opportunities in alternative vehicles. Those are all, jobs and industries that are, starting to be established in North County and already represent, a relatively strong number of jobs. I think all of those areas, I think you're going to see a lot more opportunities in solar, but I think energy efficiency and building retrofits, alternative vehicles, those are all areas where I think we need to continue to track and see where those growths are, not just in North County, but in the surrounding areas, and look for opportunities to support that.
So really, Josh, when we sort of think about that, is that this dovetails with some of the comments or the ideas that you had around leveraging North County's strength in research and development, innovations, and so forth, that we can look at areas such as electric vehicles, other sorts of ways of sort of taking transitions that we're seeing in the economy and leveraging those North County strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I think we would also want to do, I think that's spot on, Eric, but I also want to continue to look at the supply chains and understanding the relationship between some of these, research and development and innovative industries, and how we can start to commercialize more of that and connect it to some of the service providers and look at opportunities in North County and, again, the surrounding, communities to really build on some of those strengths.
Great. Well, Mark, I think hopefully we've got Mark back. We had a little bit of a technical glitch there, so we're good there. Mark, you sort of spoke about it, that you're looking at the housing market, that your expectation with inflation, that we'll see some mortgage rate increases and that house prices will at least stabilize. Any concerns, though, on the Wells Fargo side about, bubbles, or that the market's gotten overheated? Because clearly, in San Diego and in California writ large, we've seen some dramatic increases in residential house prices over the last 12 to 24 months.
I'm not concerned about a bubble at this time, and there's really not that much concern about a bubble at this time. In order for a bubble to take hold, you'd have to see a lot more speculation. And what's happened in the housing market, particularly in California, is we have a very inelastic supply curve. And I will never use that term other to describe anything else, but it just means that it's relatively steep. Like, if you hold your hand up like that, and when you have an inelastic supply curve, a small change in demand gives you a big change in price. Now that can happen on both sides. If credit were to suddenly contract and it was very difficult to get a loan, then that would cause prices to come down. But what's unusual about the current period is that credit's really not that easy to get by. I mean, again, right now, most mortgages right now have relatively high FICO scores. They're over 720, and most of them are close, over 750. So there's not a lot of people aren't taking on a lot of they're not taking on a lot of risk in the housing market right now. The other thing is that there's no supply. We have a real shortage of supply, and what we're seeing nationally, and I'd have to look at it by market, is that if you look at the cost of construction, it is basically tracking the price of an existing home. They are moving solidly together. Oddly enough, the sales price of a new home is not rising with the cost of construction. Total construction cost is around 11%. The median price of a new home is only up 6%. So builders are really getting squeezed. But the last point I'll make on this, though, is the longer that prices rise, high single digits, low double digits, the greater there's a chance that a bubble will develop. Because if you can earn excessive returns, it will attract capital from other parts of the economy. And as you start attracting more and more money, some of it's going to start reaching for returns in ways that can cause trouble. But we're nowhere near a bubble right now.
And that's really interesting. I mean, you had I think, that was an insightful point, and I just want to sort of underscore it. I don't know if you want to elaborate on it, which is that, clearly we've got some supply constraints that are a function of zoning, regulatory burdens, and what have you. But it's really interesting that you've got this squeeze that's going on in the market between what we've seen fairly, significant inflation on the input side, whether that is labor or construction materials, and then not, those prices haven't been able to be passed on from in the new construction market. Any ideas of why you think that trend's sort of occurring?
I think the reason why they can't pass the cost on is the way that most new construction, there's very little spec construction. Most new construction, someone puts a contract out on a house, and they sign a contract. They've got a purchase contract, and I think the builder just has to eat some of that higher cost because they expected that some of these items would come down in cost. And right now, I think a lot of builders, we've seen that the construction numbers have slowed nationally. And I think a lot of builders are thinking, gosh, I don't have enough margin in there to continue with this product. It is literally just about everything that goes into the price of a home that's in short supply. Cabinets are in very short supply right now. So I think that will be a limiting influence. And as long as we don't have too much supply, it's really hard for a bubble to take hold. I mean, what we had last time is we had too many homes that were owned by folks with no balance sheet or very weak balance sheets.
So Josh, one of the things that I've now done 3 of these, and so I've sort of seen this story a few times, which is the fairly dramatic differences between North County inland and household income and other metrics of people and place that we have in our indicators, and affluent coastal North County. And we're not talking about a huge amount of mileage. I mean, we're talking, 4 or 5 miles along the 78 for really going to fairly dramatic differences. If you had your sort of king for the day, or you could wave your magic wand, what would be 2 or 3 things that you would put on people's radar screen to really address this and help inland North County achieve the kind of economic prosperity that we've seen in other areas?
Yeah, it's a great question, Eric, and it's one that, at some level, North County indicators and even BW research, we spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think, North County is my home, so I have, it's hard to be just the, kind of cold, scientist looking at data. But I will say this, if we look at, all of the kind of long-term metrics of success and economic opportunity, it really starts with educational attainment. And I think one of the things we've seen, through the pandemic is individuals with higher levels of education have done much better than those with lower levels of education. So I think it starts with education. I think we need to
make a concerted effort to help those school districts in more inland communities that have lower graduation rates. Their kids aren't graduating with, the A through G requirements and aren't ready to be college or career ready. So I think it starts with education. How do we help those districts that have bigger challenges with their students? But then, the economist in me says also, we need to look at how we support entrepreneurship. There's been a lot of volatility in the economy. How do we help those businesses that have been hurt? But also we have to think about what are the new businesses that are going to come aboard and respond to this new economy? How do we support businesses in, more inland communities that are looking at, particularly export-oriented businesses? I mean, you and I know, Eric, if you can sell to a larger market than just your individual community, you have opportunities for more growth. So how do we support that? But then lastly, I think the three challenges that North County needs to look at, and maybe I'm giving you too many answers, but I think childcare is impacting our ability to get people back to work. And so childcare is an issue I would think about. We need to think about infrastructure related to bandwidth. One of the other things we saw in the data is that lower income households in North County are 2 to 3 times as likely to not have bandwidth at home. And that's so important, not only for education, but for accessing jobs. So how do we improve things like childcare, bandwidth? And then of course, our housing is always somewhat, it's a challenge that all of California is facing, but I think in North County we are facing it, considerably. And that loss of young families scares me a little bit, because they're the ones that are going to help grow our workforce.
Right. I mean, one of the things that has been I've always sort of said is that there's this virtuous cycle that occurs, right? That as a K-12 system improves, you get inward migration. As you get inward migration, you also get an opportunity for more investment in residential real estate, families with higher educational attainment, and that then creates additional feedback loops in the K-12 system. One of the things I've always sort of said is Poway is Santee, but has a great school district and thus was on a different trajectory that was laid out 40 years hence. But we've also got opportunities, right? We're going to see a huge infrastructure bill in all likelihood. Who knows what's exactly going to be in there? I mean, do you think creating greater infrastructure links between inland North County, where housing's more affordable, and job centers on the coast could do benefits to the kind of folks that migrate into communities like Vista and Escondido and even further out to the east?
Yeah, I think I am a big believer, and we're doing a big study right now in the state of New York, and they're trying to figure out how do we transition from a higher carbon footprint to a lower carbon footprint. And North County needs to be an early adopter of this. We need to think about how we develop the new transportation infrastructure, the new electrical grid that'll support the increased electrification of buildings. These things, if we can get into it early, not only do we provide a model of how to move forward, we really do. Those jobs have the opportunity to really give a lot of our tier 3 and tier 2 workers opportunities for pathways to higher levels of wages and greater livability. So yeah, I think that's a key. And I think there's been questions we need to think about. As there's a renewed kind of focus on infrastructure, we need to be on the cutting edge of that and think about how we connect with that and have a plan for North County and the greater region.
Taking a national view, the retail apocalypse, kind of maybe was accelerated by COVID. I was over at a regional mall last night, and it was it fairly put me in a depressed mood. I had to go watch light shows on Netflix to get out of it. A great British baking show, highly recommend. So let me ask you, as Wells, and again on that asset class, what are you guys thinking about retail? We talked about kind of the maybe 24 months ago, 36 months ago, we talked about experiential. Well, that seems problematic when we can't get people together in large crowds and so forth. What are you thinking about the folks that are invested in that asset class, and what Wells is thinking in the future moving forward when it comes to retail?
For the most part, the part of retailing, the format that seems most viable is a town center format, where retailing is more ancillary to other activities. You've got access to workers, you've got access to visitors that are coming to restaurants, and residents that live in that area, all of which helps support the retailing there. The experiential format was really one that came up with, was one of the first iterations to try to deal with Amazon. It was like, well, they can't go to yoga class over the internet, although my wife does it every morning with the mirror. But but it is, but you know, the experiential, I think it was fairly well thought out. I mean, a lot of folks said, well, we're going to have a restaurant that has a big morning business and another that has a big dinner business. And, you know, so they really, it was very well thought out in terms of how to accommodate the space. Nobody really saw a pandemic that would shut down the ability to meet together. So I do think that the experiential businesses are going to come back, but folks who own those types of properties are probably going to try to figure out some other ways to make them a little bit more resilient. I'm not quite sure what that would be, but it would probably be making sure to bring in some businesses that have a delivery model. Okay. So it is but retailing is going to be troubled in the very near term. As the economy opens back up, I think you're going to see a bounce back in retailing. Folks are going to get out. They want to be around other people. They want to get some ideas as to what people are going to wear, because they haven't bought everything they bought's been online, and it was probably replacing something they already had. And that'll probably give a lot of retailers an idea of which stores are going to make it for a little while longer and which ones aren't. So I think that you'll see that bounce in retail sales. And then right after that, you'll see retailers announce they're going to close a lot of stores, because if they don't get in that bounce, they're certainly not going to get it forward. But as I said at the start, I'm fairly optimistic about the economy. Consumers are sitting on a lot of money, but spending on goods actually recovered in May of last year. It's spending on services that is well behind. And I think that where we're likely to see the biggest gains are not really going to impact the retailers at the mall or discount stores to any great extent. I really think it's going to be restaurants, it's going to be resorts and travel. And even there, it's probably going to be areas that you can get to by car more than planes. But I mean, I'm not afraid of flying, but enough people are. So, and they're really more afraid that things might change while in the time that they make their plans and they actually go on their trip. So I do think that that's where you're going to see most of the rebound in spending. And it's in that the brick and mortar retail stores, you're going to get a little bit of a bounce, but it's not going to be a large one or a lasting one.
And that's great. I think, that's got high upside in terms of one of the last points that you made on hospitality, since North County is such if we have any kind of, skew to that sector, it is a drive market that's hospitality oriented, right? And so that's kind of we don't rely on a huge amount of group and a huge amount of convention or business travel. It's folks coming down from Los Angeles, Orange County, Inland Empire, Vegas, even Northern California to enjoy North County amenities. All right, so a question I didn't feed you before, so I'm going to put you on the spot here as we wrap up our Q&A. And Josh, I'm going to start with you. And Mark, I'll ask you the same question in a second. Josh, as you think about North County and COVID-19, anything that you want to mention that you haven't, which is a fundamental change that you think is going to continue with us, that has impacts for North County's economy and North County's economic development?
Yeah, I think let's think about that from two perspectives. I think from a business perspective, from an employer perspective, so we tend to split, kind of the supply side and demand side. From a demand side perspective, I expect North County's strengths in innovation and research and looking at kind of solving some of these big problems, whether it's related to the pandemic or seismic activity or drought or clean energy. Those things are going to continue to grow, and I continue to grow even more and really be the home
for North County. Is going to continue to make that transition from kind of a bedroom community to its own kind of economic employer that's increasing its level of innovative work. So I think that's here to stay and will continue. I think the on the supply side and on the workforce side, I think we're going to figure out hopefully how to do education a little better and use the best of both worlds and use small groups to learn and in person, and hopefully move more of it online where that's more appropriate. But I'm hopeful. I mean, there's been a lot of consternation around schools and school closures, but I'm really hopeful over the next 12 to 24 months we learn how to do education better, and we give kids an opportunity, particularly in high school, to expose them to the world of work while they're learning about the foundations of education. So I'm actually, I think I share Mark's optimism. I'm really hopeful how we can learn and grow from the last, because it's been a challenging 12 to 14 months, but I am hopeful about things over the next 6 to 12 to 24 months.
And Mark, you get the last word here. So as you're thinking about it, and you've mentioned a lot of these in your presentation, so I don't know if you want to either underscore a point or bring up a new one. What changes occurred or have happened in COVID that you think are going to be long-lasting and have changes in either consumer or business behavior that are going to be important moving forward in the next decade?
Well, there's one in North County, and it's more directed toward the healthcare industry, in that this whole concept of gene editing and gene therapy has really gotten a huge boost from the pandemic because of the success of Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. And I think that that's going to extend well beyond the pandemic, and we're going to see treatments and cures for diseases that were unthinkable just 5 years ago. And I think that'll be very good for the life sciences economy in North County. Similarly, communications and the need to have more chip production, more design work here in the U.S. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with immigration. There's a big fight between different aspects of Congress as to whether or not we should have more H-1B visas to bring in talented people. But we definitely need to develop all of these new communications technologies here at home. And then, in terms of working virtually and virtual education, we really need to move to where these things are complements to the way we work and the way we go to school instead of substitutes. And that would make this an opportunity instead of just making it a wash. And I really think we're going to do that. I mean, it's really incredible that you can go to edX right now and you can take classes from MIT and Harvard. And now that we've had a whole, students all over the country have learned how to go to class virtually. There's an awful lot available online right now that I think can really make a material change in people's lives. So I'm hoping that we'll go there, and that I'll learn to do more than try to fix something in my broken dishwasher from a YouTube video. Maybe I'll be able to learn some new modeling techniques off an MIT seminar.
So it's so funny, Mark. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a few days ago, and pitched the idea of becoming more proficient in SQL, since data analysis and big data work is actually in such high demand, and it's not that high a barrier for entry. But Josh and Mark, I really want to thank you for your insights today, for your questions and answers, and making our 8th annual Economic Summit a success. I hope we see you all as we move forward next year, and we'll be back again. And Mark, I hope we can get you out to make the trip in early 2022. I want to thank our sponsor today, our presenting sponsor, Wells Fargo. For 8 years, they have been critical to the success of this event and to our affairs. For investors in SDNEDC, Mark and Josh's presentations will be mailed out to you later today, and you should be getting your hard copies of the 2021 Indicators Report definitely by the end of the month. For those that are not investors, you can get more information about joining and all the Council's activities at sdnedc.org. A recording of this event will be on our website under past events, as well as on our YouTube channel. I want to especially thank Amanda Bordeaux, SDNEDC's Marketing and Events Coordinator. She was instrumental in helping market and produce this event and is critical to the Council's success. In closing, and on behalf of the entire SDNEDC, I want to thank the several hundred of you who logged on today. We hope to see you in person soon, perhaps as soon as early as our December event, where we hope to host in person our annual Excellence in North County Economic Development Awards Luncheon at the new Seabird Hotel in Oceanside, California. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.